Falcha, welcome back. This is part 6 of the Sign and the Seal. This is Irish Granny Tarot. No tarot today, just the book. Merry Christmas. And we were just finished Graham Hancock's experience at that terrible riot in the 90s at the Wailing Wall and the Dome of the Rock. And now we're on chapter 15, The Hidden History. So Ethiopia's claim to having the Ark has never been challenged by any strong alternative evidence or information. And notes, where am I? And he asks, why? Why is that? Why have there not been a challenge to this claim? The great mystery is there's no report that the Ark was carried away or destroyed. There's not even any comment. And then the Ark disappeared and we don't know what happened to it. And no one knows where it is to this day. The most important object in the world, in the biblical view, simply ceases to exist in the story. What the heck? The Kebra describes Solomon's grief. He thought that his son Menelik had stolen it when he left. And he told the elders to keep it quiet. And so Hancock is saying, is it possible that this was a huge, gigantic cover-up from day one? And the elders of Israel made answer and said unto him, May thy good pleasure be done, and the good pleasure of the Lord God. As for us, none of us will transgress thy word, and we will not inform any other people that the Ark hath been taken away from us. And they established this covenant in the house of God, the elders of Israel, with their king Solomon, until this day. That's the Kebra Nagast. So there is evidence of the Queen of Sheba being an Ethiopian, but the existence of her having a son Menelik by Solomon is actually thin. It's hard to believe that such an advanced culture with a central monarchy was in Ethiopia in 10th century BC when they were thought to be savages. And that's the term used to describe them by many anthropologists. Hancock's research seemed to say that the Ark was probably in a Lake Tana at Tana Kirkos 400 years after the Queen of Sheba. How could Menelik have removed it and carried it away unnoticed? Hancock thought the story could be embroidered on a real event, but blown out of proportion. He believed that Ethiopian society and culture had a strong claim. The Kebra said the theft was a cover-up. So, what's the truth behind all of this? Calculating the time chronology, Hancock said that he hunted for mentions of the Ark written from that time period. There's a passage from Kings in the Bible that makes reference to the poles of the Ark, the carrying poles of the Ark. They formed a screen above the Ark and its poles. The poles projected and their ends could be seen from the holy place immediately in front of the inner shrine, but from nowhere else outside, and they are there until this day. And he said it seems odd. That was almost like, why would you even mention something like that? It almost seems like they were trying to convince people the Ark was really there by having these poles prominently sticking out, but you couldn't go in and look any farther. Just to convince people. In 1928, Julian Morgenstein wrote that the scribe must have intended to convince his readers that the staves of the Ark, and therefore, of course, the Ark itself, were present in the innermost part of the temple, even though they could not be seen by the people at large, or for that matter by anyone other than the high priest when he entered the Holy of Holies once a year on Yom Kippur. The fact that the scribe seems to have felt compelled to insist in this manner that the Ark was still present in the temple in his day indicates that he must have had to contend with a prevalent and persistent doubt of this, a doubt founded, in all likelihood, upon actual fact. Not this was all. The very next verse in the same chapter of the book of Kings insisted that there was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets Moses had placed in it. The tablets of the covenant which Yahweh had made with the Israelites when they came out of the land of Egypt. They are still there today. And then a direct and positive affirmation, almost it would seem, in the face of a doubt or question, that the tablets of the 10 Commandments are still present in the ark in these days. And what they're getting at here is that, quote, the lady doth protest too much. Why go out of your way over and over and over to say it's still there, but you can't see it? Wouldn't the assumption be that it's still there if they're protecting it, etc., etc.? I mean, it seems oddly pointed. The ark disappeared before 640 BC. The ancestors of the Philashes went to Ethiopia before 640 BC and practiced ancient rituals that no longer were done in Jerusalem after they left. Is this a coincidence? It's said that Josiah had a premonition of the Babylonians and he arranged to hide the ark. But Josiah was a reformer and he told the guardians of the ark, the Levites, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, did build. It shall not be a burden upon your shoulders. So he didn't remove it. He thought the Levites had it, and therefore the ark was already gone by 622 BC. This was the last mention of the ark in the Old Testament. Second to the last in the Old Testament, Jeremiah. This next one is second to the last. Jeremiah says, when you have increased and become many in the land, it is Yahweh who speaks. No one will ever say again, where is the ark of the covenant of Yahweh? There will be no thought of it, no memory of it, no regret for it, no making of another. So why are they asking where is it, and why are they regretting it? So Hancock says, was it missing in 626 BC? Jeremiah. So this idea follows upon words of consolation and itself contains a message of consolation and mercy. What the prophet promises here is that in the good days to come there will no longer be any need for the ark, implying that its absence should no longer cause any grief. These words would of course be devoid of any significance if the ark had still been inside of the temple. And this is supported by Professor Menahem Haran, an expert on the Bible and on these ancient Jewish beliefs. So Hancock decided to look back before 626 BC, which by that time, from that time, the ark might have already been removed by the predecessors of Josiah. So what he's doing is he's trying to make a timeline. When was the last time it was mentioned, and what did they say? Already the last time it was mentioned, they're talking about grief over its loss. So Solomon built it, well, this would be for you. Solomon built it, and then it's mentioned as lost. So in that chronology there, what can he find? So he found in the Bible, 2 Chronicles 26, Uzziah ran into the temple and at the Holy of Holies and waved his incense around in front of the Holy of Holies. And while he was wroth with the priests, the leprosy arose up on his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord from beside the incense altar. So this happened in 740 BC, so it sounds like the ark was still there giving people sores. There are 2 references to between the cherubim in Isaiah chapter 3 and Kings chapter 19. These words, historians believe, actually were written by Isaiah the prophet. And in 701 BC, there's a prayer at the ark to Yahweh to protect against Assyrian forces of Sennacherib. So, where is it? Yahweh says, I will defend this city to save it for my own sake. The Syrians are attacking. Yahweh was as good as his word. The angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 180,500, and when they arose early in the morning behold, they were all dead corpses. So the Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed. So the ark was up to its old tricks. It must have been there. The Assyrians fled. They thought that they were afflicted with the bubonic plague, but there was no outbreak in Jerusalem. So the Assyrians, if they were exposed to the plague, didn't pass it on to anybody, and we know how easy that is to do, right? So this passage refers to him going before the Lord, as in many cases of people praying in front of the ark, they go before the Lord. And it was there so that they could go before it. Solomon was already dead. So this discredits the myth in the Kebra that Menelik took the ark before Solomon's death, just logically. If the ark is there and they're praying in front of it and they're breaking out in horrible lesions all over because they're being punished by the ark, it's still there. Solomon's dead. So this myth of Menelik taking it is iffy. Hancock discovered that in 687 to 642 BC, a guy called Manasseh had put a carved idol in the Holy of Holies. The ark couldn't share that space. It was the sign and the seal of monotheism. They wouldn't have a carved idol, and it would have been too much of a sacrilege. He had set a graven image of the grove that he had made in the house, of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. And Manasseh was said to have shed innocent blood in such great quantity that he flooded Jerusalem from end to end. So the ark couldn't share a space with an idol. It is possible that Manasseh ordered the Levites to remove the ark. He's remembered for terrible bloodshed. And after his son Ammon took charge, then there was Josiah. So it was Manasseh, Ammon, and Josiah. And Josiah was in 640. And he was a big reformer who restored the traditions of the worship of Yahweh, which had gone by the wayside under Manasseh. And Manasseh was said to have shed blood, and that which is evil in the sight of the Lord, Ammon, as his father Manasseh did, he did. And he walked in all the ways that his father walked in, and served the idols that his father served, and worshipped them. And the servants of Ammon conspired against him and slew the king in his own house, and the people of the land made Josiah his son king in his stead. So it sounds like he was his grandson, I think. But anyway, this began, he was 8 years old when he was made king, but at the age of 20, he really took over. And Jeremiah had written 2 years after Josiah that people mourned the ark and prophesied it would return. So when Josiah asked the Levites to put the ark back, they couldn't because the ark was already gone. And this has been confirmed by this other reading, which I'm going to spare you. Trust me, it's just that the ark and the cherubim are gone. Haran, this professor, said that the ark likely was removed from Jerusalem because it wasn't safe during Manasseh's time. Manasseh was a tyrant, and he was not fond of Yahweh and challenged the traditional Jewish beliefs, and he would have possibly damaged the ark or burnt it or whatever. He had all these persecutions, and interestingly enough, that during his reign, there were no prophets. So there's a period of 200 years to figure out between the time of Manasseh and the removal of the ark and 470 when the ark appears in Ethiopia. So where was it in those 200 years? It was spirited away, perhaps, to protect it from Manasseh. So then what happened? Hancock arranged to talk with a transplanted Ethiopian Jewish priest, a Falasha, in Israel by the name of Raphael Hadane. So just to pause for a second. Hancock's making a chronology, and he's taking all of the information that he can and trying to do a logical analysis of the likelihood of the ark being at any particular place at a given time, just by logic. And by the process of elimination, he's figured out that the story of Menelik is probably not true, and that instead the ark was there longer, but that it was carried away to protect it, and during a time when there was religious upheaval in Jerusalem. So now he's going to talk to this expert on Philasha, this Jewish priest, and look at it from that angle. And he asks, when did the Jews arrive in Ethiopia? And the Jews who had left Jerusalem stayed in Egypt 200 years before going on to Ethiopia. They didn't just run to Ethiopia. It took them 200 years to filter down. There was a temple at Aswan that was built before the ark left Jerusalem. Now here's an interesting tidbit. They can verify that this temple was built. They can verify when it was built. It was built before they think the ark was missing during Manasseh's time. Rescued by Jeremiah, Joshua, one of those guys. So this was at Aswan. Why would they suddenly build a Jewish temple, which is only to take care of the ark? Remember, they didn't do, it's not a church. It's a temple for the containment of a particular god. And these temples are for Yahweh. Why, in Aswan, did they suddenly build a Jewish temple? Well, it was built at Aswan, maybe to house the ark when it was taken from Jerusalem for its own protection. And then a foreign king came to Egypt and destroyed all the temples. This is later, destroyed all the temples except for that one temple. The Egyptians didn't like this. They couldn't understand why this one temple was allowed to stand, this Jewish temple. And they destroyed it, and it forced the Jews to flee again. So they had a pit stop in Aswan for a couple of hundred years. And then because of political upheaval and the destruction of religious temples, and the jealousy of the locals because theirs didn't get destroyed, they fled first to the Sudan, and they split up. There was one group that followed the Takasi River, and then there's one group that followed the Nile. And all along those areas is where the Jewish settlements are even until today. They arrived at Lake Tana, but they lost touch with Israel. And Hancock asked, is any place along that way sacred to their religion still today? And they said yes. The Tana Kerkos is the most important, but then also Daga Stephanos and Zegier. And so Hancock believes that the ark is in the Church of St. Mary's in Axum, and went some years ago to visit and was told he couldn't see it. So he feels the Christians are jealous of the possession of the ark. They don't want it returned to the Jews, and they're being obstructionist. He called a guy called Dr. Shalva Veal and asks, was there ever really a temple at Aswan? And he said, yes, there was, on the island of Elephantine in the Nile, a 5-minute sailing trip from Aswan. And FYI, they're doing an archaeological dig right there right now. He told Hancock that there are some scholars who believe that the Philashas descended from the Jews who fled the island of Elephantine when the temple was destroyed by the local Egyptians out of jealousy in the 5th century BC. At Tanakerkos, tradition says that's when the ark arrived. So now he's getting a story that's chronologically being fleshed out a little bit. No, the ark didn't get carried off by Menelik. That's a story because they're still talking about it in Jerusalem in the Bible. But they do have solid evidence for a destruction of traditional belief systems and an attack on the temple by the dictator guy, and therefore spiriting away of the ark, which is then grieved by the people. Why would they grieve it? Because it was gone. Where did it go? They carried it to Aswan, where they'd already prepared a temple, proof that that exists. And then a couple of hundred years later, off they go with it again to Tanakirkos. So now we're on chapter 16, the door of the southern countries. Aswan on the Nile is halfway between Israel and Ethiopia, and it's a big trading area. It means making business, the name does, from the Egyptian. A German Archaeological Institute of Berlin had an archaeologist who met with Hancock and said that they dug under the Roman temple that was built on the site of a Jewish temple and found nothing in Elephantine. They did find what are called ostrach, which are potsherds and papyrus scrolls of letters between the island of Elephantine and Jerusalem, back and forth. And the temple had been there. They know that. It was destroyed in 410 BC. And there's a 60-year difference here, but Hancock says that this is an oral tradition, so being off by 60 years is not a huge problem in the larger scope of things, and historians agree with him. There are often new temples of different gods built on the site of old temples to previous religious beliefs, using the same materials that are lying around. And in Italy, you can see they have Catholic churches that are being used today that are ancient, that were built, over 1,000 years ago on the site of early Christian church. And you can go down into a lower level and see the remnants of the early Christian church. But you can go even farther and see the remnants of the ancient pagan temples. Fascinating. This archaeologist let him borrow some books on the research that they'd been doing, and did say that he believed the dates of the building of the Elephantine temple in the 7th century BC would work with all this evidence that he's trying to compile. The book said that the evidence proves that there was a temple that was exactly the same size as the Temple of Solomon. It was made with a cedar wood roof, just like the Temple of Solomon. And it was copied from the Temple of Solomon. Why was it built to hold the ark, is the question. Animal sacrifice was routine, and therefore it was built before the reforms of Josiah. These people must have left Jerusalem and kept written contact, and they must have known about the reforms, but they felt that the temple was special to continue with the ancient forms of worship. Why was it special? Did it contain the ark? They clearly wrote that Yahweh was in the temple dwelling there. That means the ark, because Yahweh and the ark were synonymous. Yahweh resided where the ark was. It spoke of the Lord's hosts, the Lord of hosts, very archaic, and it must have been built by 650 BC, based on Hancock's process of elimination during the reign of Manasseh. Archaeologists believe that the reason for the temple was Manasseh's killings, that he was terrible. And let me see here. Manasseh's reign was accompanied by much bloodshed, and it may be surmised that priests as well as prophets opposed his paganization. Some of the priests fled to Egypt, joining the Jewish garrison at Elephantine, and there erected the temple. So there you go. Boom. They have written evidence of this. It seems likely they felt it was okay to build this temple even on foreign soil, because it would be special, because foreign soil is impure. But in this particular case, because the ark had to be housed someplace, this was like a reprieve. Hancock discovered Josiah couldn't ask for the ark back because by the time the temple was restored, Judah and Egypt were at war. So there's a reason why it sort of ended up staying gone. Because by the time that they were in a position to ask for it back, it was too late. They had the temple rebuilt, and now it's too late because there's a war going on. And ethnographic fingerprint of the Falasha people show the travel and the settlement through Egypt and the Sudan, down the Nile, into Lake Tana, support all of this. You can follow the passage just genetically and culturally. Now, historical and archaeological orthodoxy say, oh, no, they came from Arabia, from Yemen. But there's an awful lot of new evidence that's come out that challenges this mainstream orthodoxy, which never likes to be challenged, as we well know. And there are several quite substantiated Jewish communities in Egypt for hundreds of years before any Jews ever settled in southern Arabia. Before the Romans, it was 770 AD when the Romans were persecuting the Jews in Palestine, is when they supposedly fled to Arabia. And he's saying there's all kinds of substantial evidence that they'd already been in Egypt for hundreds of years. Judaism was carried southeast from Egypt into Ethiopia, and Hancock, his principal conclusions are, just to review, there's an extreme antiquity of Judaism of the Falashas, including animal sacrifice, amongst many other rituals and beliefs, point to its connection to the past more than to the modernization of, speaking, of modernization for the time. The Jewish priests at Elephantine were called Kahen, and the Falasha priests are called Kahen. One of the Elephantine temple's names was Mesgid, place of prostration. Falashas have no synagogues or temples in Ethiopia, but they have Mesgid, simple houses of worship. They both assume the position of prostration on their knees before the ark, as with ancient times in Solomon. The temple at Aswan was protected from destruction by a foreign king, and they looked this up. They researched it and found that it was Cambyses, the son of Cyrus. And I wondered this myself. Why did he do this? When he came to Egypt, he found this Jewish temple built. The Persians had knocked down all the temples of the gods in Egypt, but no one did any damage to this temple of the Jews. And the temple was destroyed when his protection left. The Falashas venerated Tanakerkos as a sacred spot. The ancestors of the Falashas reached Ethiopia, passed through the city of Meroe, and after 1,500 years, finally, it was unearthed in 1772 by, wait for it, James Bruce. And he was searching for the ark. I don't know, he was not looking for the source of the Nile at the site of the city of Meroe that had been buried for 1,500 years. Hancock asks, when the temple on Elephantine was destroyed, why not take the ark back to Jerusalem? Well, the reality is the priests were not happy to get competitors with the ark. The ark's like a hot potato. If you're not impure and it doesn't kill you or give you boils, then you've got this thing that's hard to take with you because it implies that you have so much power, nobody wants you around. People are afraid of it. Nobody wants to compete with your power. So the priests weren't happy to get competitors who had the ark. They would have felt alien. The people who had the ark would have felt alien after hundreds of years of being disconnected from their religious ancestors. The religious belief had changed in Israel dramatically, and the ark was no longer significant. It was to the people who had it, but they had been cut off. The south seemed like a safer choice. Ethiopia in Greek means burnt faces. And they knew Ethiopia from earlier military expeditions. There's documentation of many people traveling to Meroe, Ethiopia, and the area was called the Land of Deserters. 240,000 Egyptian fighters revolted and joined the forces of the Ethiopian king in 595 to 589 BC. It's also documented that Jews were sent to fight them. And the Abyssinian highlands would have been an attractive destination to the Jews fleeing Elephantine. So there was a history of familiarity and there was a history and an existence of other Jewish settlements. In the Bible, Ethiopia is often called Cush, and the Jews were already there. Moses married an Ethiopian and had lived in Ethiopia from 40 to 80 years old. Several Old Testament passages imply Ethiopia was special to Yahweh and the Jews. Let's see what they had to say. That there had been a voluntary migration. Now, there's several different translations of different sources, and they line them up side by side, and I'm only going to read one. Are you not and the Cushites all the same to me, sons of Israel? It is Yahweh who speaks. It's from the Jerusalem Bible. They have the King James Version and the New English Bible. They all say basically the same thing, that Yahweh claims the Cushites, Ethiopians, as children of Israel. Biblical data leads credibility to the idea of a relationship between Israel and Abyssinia, Ethiopia. Other sources speak of waves of migration from ancient times. The Wambar, the priest of the Hebrew pagans, speak of those from the land of Canaan who founded their religion to begin with. They claimed that they were interrelated to the later coming Phalasha. Linguistically and ethnographically, evidence supports this relationship. So there's a lot of persuasive factual stuff. There were always Jews in Ethiopia from the beginning, wrote the Portuguese Jesuit Balthazar Tellez in the 17th century. In this judgment, he was, I suspect, far closer to the truth than those modern scholars who ascribe a relatively late date to the arrival of Judaism and who seem to be completely blind to all the evidence that runs contrary to their own prejudices. They get entrenched. If we have learned nothing else, The Dawn of Everything, Joseph Farrell's books on giants and genetics, and this book, over and over, it's driven home that scholars, academics, professors, archaeologists, historians, anthropologists become entrenched in their own beliefs. You hang your tenure on something, you hang your professional reputation on it. It's hard to say, I was wrong. And even if that's not the issue, people really believe what they really believe and don't want to see anything that doesn't have an element of confirmation bias. And it's wonderful to have somebody like Hancock who is willing to say, well, now hang on there. There's evidence here contrary to what you seem to think. Love it. So waves of ancient migration that show an interrelationship, linguistics, ethnography support this. Hancock questioned his theory, and I love that about him. He's willing to say, let me make sure, questioned his theory that the Jews with the Ark came into Ethiopia in part due to earlier waves of Jewish migration. Data from the Phalasha and the Kamont, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Hebreo pagans, and from the Old Testament support his theory. But he needed tangible archaeological or documentary evidence. And he was sent a paper written by a woman called Jacqueline Pirenne of the University of Strasbourg. From somebody else, another academic, sent this paper, who warned that the paper's way over the top, but you asked me for anything, and so here's something, but I'm telling you that her work is way over the top. To strip a rather complex thesis down to its bare essentials, the main thrust of her argument was that scholars who had examined the historical relationship between Ethiopia and South Arabia had come completely wrong. Far from Sabian influences reaching Ethiopia, those are the early Christian, from Yemen, as had previously been supposed, the flow had in fact been in the opposite direction. In other words, from Ethiopia to South Arabia. The Sabians arrived first of all in Ethiopian Tigray and entered Yemen via the Red Sea coast. This conclusion, which is the absolute contrary to all recognized views, is the only one to explain the facts that exist and to do them justice. Perrin then went on to demonstrate that the original homeland of the Sabians had been in northwest Arabia, but that large numbers of them had emigrated from there to Ethiopia via the Hamat riverbed and along the Nile in two separate waves, the first around 690 BC and the second around 590 BC. Why had they emigrated? In order to avoid paying tribute to the Assyrian invaders Sennacherib on the first occasion, and in order to avoid paying tribute to the Babylonian conqueror Nebuchadnezzar on the second. So her work documents the arrival of the Hebrews with the Sabians fleeing Jerusalem into Arabia and fleeing the Babylonians. And the Hebrews in Ethiopia Hebrews were in Ethiopia first when the Sabians arrived, fleeing from the same Babylonians. It's now believed to a high degree of probability that the Ark is in Axum. And so Hancock had to face these TPLF, or the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front rebels. He had tried to follow the evidence to talk himself out of it. He did not want to go to Axum. He didn't want to go into a war zone. But looking at it from all sides, arguing himself, trying to prove himself wrong, he proved that he had to go. He had no other place it could be, no proof that it was destroyed, no proof that it was anywhere else. The story of Sheba seemed to be a metaphor, and likely the journey after Solomon to Elephantine was from Elephantine to Ethiopia. So he felt that it would be a test of character to try to get there. He put himself up to the challenge. And he said he identified with Sir Gawain in the story of Sir Gawain and the Grail. If you come there, you'll be killed. Therefore, good Sir Gawain, ride by another route to some region remote. Go in the name of God and Christ, grace your fortune. And I shall be home again and undertake to swear solemnly by God and his saints as well, stoutly to keep your secret, not saying to a soul that you ever tried to turn tail. Gawain replied, it is worthy of you to wish for me well-being, man, and I believe you would loyally lock it in your heart. But however quiet you kept it, if I quit this place, fled in the fashion you propose, I should become a cowardly knight with no excuse whatever. I will go to the Green Chapel to get what fate sends. This is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which I had to read in high school. So he's identifying a little bit. He's really getting into this, identifying with this character, and he was going to have to go to his own chapel of mischance. So part 6, Ethiopia, 1990 to 1991, the wasteland. Chapter 17, Supping with Devils. Hancock decided that going to Axum in January for Tinkat was the only thing he could do. He was uncertain that the Christians would process the real Ark, even if they had it. He was worried that the Falasha priests in Jerusalem, he was warned by the Falasha priests in Jerusalem that the Christians would use a replica, that there was no way they were going to parade the real thing around. That they had it, but they weren't going to parade it around. He knew he'd have to risk being in the hands of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, and he worried because of his close link to the 83 to the 89 tyrant, the dictator's government. In 82, as I said, he started his own publishing company and had a contract with the Ethiopian Tourism Commission, and important government people liked his work, and one of those was Mengistu, the dictator. So he realized that he allowed himself to be a supporter of the government and didn't approve of its repression, but he convinced himself that some of its programs were good because his business was going great, and he was willing to not turn a blind eye, but justify some of this stuff. 84 to 85, there was a resettlement program of the government that was moving famine-stricken peasants from Tigray to land in the Southwest. And the TPLF saw this as an effort to weaken their rebellion by depriving them of grassroots supports and recruits. he helped to air a profile on the BBC, a positive profile of Mengistu. He did these things without understanding what was really going on. And as you'll see, this trip really was a quest for him. He made some connections. He had been used in 88 and 89 to carry messages between Ethiopia and Somalia, the dictator of which was friends with Mengistu. He was convinced that he was helping a peace process. At the time, I thought that what I was doing was honorable, worthwhile, and manifestly in a good cause. Moreover, and I think it's brave of him to admit this, it had flattered my ego to play the part of honest broker between opponents as powerful and as dangerous as Mengistu and Bar. Such psychological inducements, however, had completely blinded me to the downside of my activities, the extent to which the close personal relationships that I was obliged to build with these cruel and calculating men might corrupt and compromise my own character. There is an old proverb which recommends that anyone planning to sup with the devil should use a long spoon. During my little burst of amateur diplomacy, I supped with two devils, and unfortunately, I neglected to use a spoon at all. Now he had to live with the consequences. The peace plan that he helped broker cut off the rebels, cut off their money, and it cut off their help in both countries. And he feared that they might agree to help him, to get their hands on him, and then stage some sort of fatal accident. So he needed visas to pass through Sudan, but the British were out of favor because of the Gulf War and their support of the Americans. So TPLF said, tough luck, get your own visa. If you get your own visa, we'll let you in, but we're not going to help you. So he decided to get an old friend to do a TV spot on Tigray rebels and make them look good. There had been rumors they were destroying churches as they went along, but they weren't. So what he did was he brokered this sort of round robin of, you do a favor for me, I'll do a favor for you. And he gave his friend who worked for the BBC the opportunity for a scoop. He gave the TPLF the opportunity for some image reform, and in return he would get his visa. They were losing the propaganda war, so Hancock could offer positive coverage in exchange for passage, and he was able to make it happen. Chapter 18, A Treasure Hard to Attain. So he got to Khartoum, and there's some wonderful descriptions in this book that I'm glossing over in the interests of time. But he talks about what it was like the second time he came back to many of these places, the changes. There was curfew with soldiers armed, an eerie atmosphere, the adoption of Islamic law. They went to eat and they were looking forward to a beer. You could have no alcohol. Very tense atmosphere. He said there was a lot of bureaucratic delay and frustration, but he finally was able to drive through the Sudanese desert, and that's quite a story. They saw a lot of dead animals, they said, which they didn't realize at the time was a warning of the famine that was coming. They met up with a TPLF convoy that helped them cross the border into Eritrea, which was having its own civil war, battle for independence. Lots of armed men everywhere. Their convoy had to hide in the trees with tarps over them just so that no metal would shine and attract bombers. It was time for him to contemplate the true value of the Ark. Why are we doing this? Why am I going after this? And he realized, like many other people over time, this was a search for the mystery of it, the magic of it, the marvels. So the next night, there was no convoy, and they went anyway, and they got shot at. And they did make it to Axum, and when they got there, he got out of the truck and kissed the ground. It's a harrowing story. You should really need to read this. It's really good. So he decided to lie low until the ceremony started for the Ark, so that they wouldn't substitute it when they knew he was going to be there to trick him. So he debated maybe meeting the clergy sooner, so that he could assure them that his intentions were good. So while he was going through this big debate in his head, he was having breakfast, and his TPLF guide came up to him and said, hey, my father wants to meet you. He's a priest at the church where the ark is. And Hancock asked him, would they use a real ark or a substitute? And so then he starts getting the runaround. This priest says, well, you'd have to meet the senior priest, and if he okays it, then you could meet the guardian, and then the guardian would have to decide what information to give you. But this is not the old guardian that you met before. He's dead. The new one was replaced 4 years ago. So the former guardian had run away when he was first chosen. And they had to chase him down and chain him into the chapel until he accepted his responsibility. Because once you were appointed the guardian and you were chosen by the former guardian, you could never leave the ark again. You would have no life. You exist only to serve it, burning incense and being before it constantly. Government officials came before the rebels took Axum and tried to take the ark away, and the entire population of the town sort of encircled around it and became forceful and aggressive and resisted, is how they put it. We resisted. There were demonstrations in the government street, and the government gave up and left. So that's pretty scary. Since the TPLF situation in the church, since this TPLF had come, the situation for the churches had much improved. The situation in the towns had much improved. During government time, there never was peace. There was fear. There was a curfew. They said, now we can relax. So he was able to go while he was waiting to visit archaeological sites that had been closed when he was there the first time in 83. And he found a ruin with a pre-Christian lioness in a relief. And what was over this lioness above it? The Knights Templar cross. And if you remember, that was assigned by the Pope and only they were allowed to use it. And here it is in Ethiopia. There was a contingent of Templars that came with Lalibela in 1185. Remember we read about him? And they were said to be the bearers of the ark. And a 13th century geographer had described the ark that was carried by white men with red hair. And we read about that earlier. They also found a Templar's cross in the ruins of King Caleb's palace, circa 13th century. And Hancock saw several of these crosses and believed that they were evidence that the Templars were there because this was exclusively theirs. Nobody else was allowed to use it. Hancock told the head priest, Hancock was told that the head priest was gone, so there was nobody to give him permission to talk to the guardian. And he knew that this was polite obstruction, that they were just making things hard for him. So he decided to ask the deputy head priest, and he noted a much improved attitude and an atmosphere since the government had gone. The deputy priest agreed to see him and said it was okay for him to talk to the guardian, and Hancock joked how easy it would be to run to the door and to go into the ark before anybody could get to them. And the priest looked at him and said, you would never make it, you'd be killed. And he pointed, and there were 6 deacons. They were like minor clergy hanging around. And he said they were big and they were imposing and they looked scary, and he stopped joking. So the guardian came out, and like his predecessor, I think this is really significant, and Hancock doesn't mention it much after this, but I think this is significant. He had severe cataracts. What causes severe cataracts? Well, what's one of the things that can cause severe cataracts? Radiation. So, he wouldn't describe the ark for Hancock. He just said it performs miracles and it is a miracle. Hancock couldn't get anything more out of him and asked at Timcot, did they use the real ark or a replica? And the guardian said, come see for yourself and you will know. So on Timcot, it was carried out and processed around, And this is, I'm going to read you a little bit here because I couldn't do it justice and summarize it well. When the Timcot ceremony began late in the afternoon of Friday, 18th January 1991, it was a bulky rectangular chest over which was draped a thick blue cloth embroidered with an emblem of a dove. And I remembered that in Wolfram's Parzival, the dove too had been the emblem of the grave. Yet I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that what I was looking at was neither the Grail nor the Ark. Rather, it was itself an emblem and a symbol and a token and a sign. And as the priest had warned me months before, the sacred relic kept in the sanctuary chapel remained there, jealously guarded. How then could I be so sure that this was a replica? The answer is simple. The guardian never came out for the procession, and it was his job to always stay with the ark. He was never supposed to leave the ark. He stayed inside the inner sanctum the whole time. In this way, I believe at last that I did glimpse the secret behind the symbol, the glorious enigma proclaimed in so many wondrous signs, proclaimed and yet not revealed. For the Ethiopians know that if you want to hide a tree, you must place it in a forest. And what else are the replicas that they venerate in 20,000 churches, if not a veritable forest of signs? At the heart of that forest lies the ark itself, the Golden Ark that was built on the foot of Mount Sinai, that was carried through the wilderness and across the river Jordan, that brought victory to the Israelites in their struggle to win the promised land, that was taken up to Jerusalem by King David, and that around 955 BC was deposited by Solomon in the Holy of Holies in the first temple. From there, some 300 years later, it was removed by faithful priests who sought to preserve it from pollution at the hands of the sinner Manasseh, and who bore it away to safety in the far-off Egyptian island of Elephantine. There, a new temple was built to house it, a temple in which it remained for 2 further centuries. When the temple was destroyed, however, its restless wanderings resumed again, and it was carried southward into Ethiopia, into the land shadowing with wings, into the land crisscrossed by rivers. Having come from one island, it was taken to another, to green and verdant Tana Kerkos, where it was installed in a simple tabernacle and worshipped by simple folk. For the 800 years that followed, it stood at the center of a large and idiosyncratic Judaic cult, a cult whose members were the ancestors of all Ethiopian Jews today. Then the Christians came preaching a new religion, and after converting the king, they were able to seize the ark for themselves. They took it to Axum and placed it in the great church that they built there, a church dedicated to St. Mary, the Mother of Christ. Many more years went by, and as the weary centuries passed, the memory of how the ark had really come to Ethiopia grew blurred. Legends began to circulate to account for the now mysterious and inexplicable fact that a small city in the remote highlands of Tigray appeared to have been selected, presumably by God himself, as the last resting place of the most precious and prestigious relic of the Old Testament times. These legends were eventually codified and sent down in writing in the form of the Kebra Nagast, a document containing so many errors, anachronisms, and inconsistencies that later generations of scholars were never able to see their way through to the single ancient and recondite truth concealed beneath the layers of myth and magic. That truth, however, was recognized by the Knights Templar, who understood its earth-shaking power and who came to Ethiopia in pursuit of it. It was moreover expressed by Wolfram von Eschenbach in his story of Parzival, where the Holy Grail, the consummation of heart's desire, served as an occult cryptogram for the Holy Ark of the Covenant. In Wolfgram's text, the heathen Phlegitanus was said to have penetrated the hidden mysteries of the constellations and to have declared in a reverential voice that there was indeed a thing called the Grail. He declared also that this perfect thing, this spiritual thing, was guarded by a Christian progeny bred to a pure life, and he concluded his soothsaying with these words: "Those humans who are summoned to the Grail are ever worthy. So too those humans who are summoned to the Ark, for Ark and Grail are one and the same. I, for my part, however, was never worthy enough. I knew it even as I traversed the wasteland. I knew it as I approached the sanctuary chapel. I know it still, and yet, my heart is glad, and my very soul rejoices, and my flesh also shall rest in hope. The end. So that was a great book. A fascinating quest. Ends with a sense of finality and yet just still a tiny bit of mystery. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I guess tomorrow we'll ask some questions. Now I've got about 17 million comments to answer. And if you have questions, this would be the time, because tomorrow I'll be reading the cards on our book. And I just think this is a much more satisfying historical and archaeological quest than the sort of conspiratorial Dan Brown Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. This has a sense of continuity to history with some evidence that can back up his theories. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a lovely Christmas, and I appreciate everybody listening, and I'm actually glad I had this to do today. It made the time pass. It was fun. So enjoy the rest of your Christmas. Try to find Alistair Sims as Scrooge, in my opinion, the best version of the Christmas Carol. And in the meantime, Slán go fóill, sláinte, and Nollaig Shona duit.